Hi and welcome to today's session on imposter syndrome. I'm Poppy Verner and this session has been brought to you for the Digital Futures Festival by Employability, Bridgend. Let's get started. In this session we're going to discuss imposter syndrome, what it is and how we can overcome it. So to get started I'm going to introduce myself. I'm Poppy, I'm a social media manager, content creator and founder of Fleur Studio. But before all of this, I was a nail technician, a junior in fact, at a nail salon in my hometown in Northamptonshire. This was my first time experiencing imposter syndrome, except I didn't know what it was. It was when I was at university that I fully understood what imposter syndrome was. I first started to feel it in my lectures in first year. As you can see from the picture, I went to Cardiff University, so I'm a local girl, local to Bridgend. University was incredibly overwhelming. It felt like everybody there was so much smarter and so much posher than me. I felt like because I hadn't done the traditional route of doing A-levels to get into university, that I wasn't worth being there. I actually studied an access degree to get into university. Being from a low-income background meant that I had to work alongside university, and I decided to start my first business, Fleur Studio, except this rendition of Fleur Studio was a nail salon. And despite its relative success, unfortunately, I still felt like an imposter. And maybe you heard that and thought, how is this somebody who's dealing with imposter syndrome? In the grand scheme of things, I had achieved quite a lot for somebody who was only 24. But that's the thing, imposter syndrome has no rhyme or reason. It can affect anyone. Let's look at another example. After writing 11 books and winning multiple prestigious awards, writer Maya Angelou felt that she hadn't earned her accomplishments, which is crazy. She famously said, "I've run a game on everybody and they're going to find me out." The feeling of fraudulence or the unshakable doubt that we have not earned our success is much more common than we realise. Regardless of gender, race, age, sexuality, class or religion, the concept of imposterism has been felt by all. That being said, the feelings are often worsened in minority groups, with some theorising this is due to underrepresentation. For example, if you're a young working-class Asian woman working in a law firm, you might feel severely underrepresented. This could worsen the symptoms of imposter syndrome, because these environments are stereotypically populated by white middle-class males. So let's just do a quick overview of the signs of imposter syndrome. You attribute your accomplishments to luck rather than your skills or ability. You might be dealing with imposter syndrome. You have a fear of being found out or discovered as a fraud. You try to do every task perfectly, meaning you often get task paralysis or over-prepare. Task paralysis is the act of being unable to complete a task because it feels too overwhelming or too big. For example, when you have a job application to write or an essay to do, you might do the dishwasher instead. Lastly, when people praise you for your accomplishments or skills, you feel like you've tricked them and gotten away with it. It's widely agreed that there are 5 types of imposter syndrome. However, as imposter syndrome isn't a diagnosable condition, this research is more based on anecdotal evidence than anything. First up, we have the soloist. The soloist is a lone wolf, often showing these traits. They can be overly independent, not wanting to work in group projects or group work. They can see the help or assistance that you might offer them as a weakness. For example, if they got you to read over their essay and you made some minor changes, your changes would mean that the whole essay was rubbish and that they are rubbish at what they're doing. They often just don't feel deserving of that help. They feel like your help would be best spent elsewhere. And they would rather do things alone, so as not to feel perceived during what they're doing. Next up, we have the perfectionist. Now, a lot of us will call ourselves perfectionists, but in this regard, the perfectionist often feels like failure is the worst possible outcome, the worst thing in the world that could ever happen to them. They can be known to seek perfection to an extreme degree, and if it's not perfect, it can rock their world emotionally. They seek comfort in being in control, often wanting to be the person who books the flights or the person who presents the group project. They can suffer a lot with task paralysis, which goes against their very nature of being in control. And they'll often push themselves to outperform what they last did. So for example, if last time they did some work, they got an A on it, this time they have to get an A star, otherwise it's a failure. Next up, we have the natural genius. Despite the name, the natural genius doesn't necessarily believe that they are in fact a genius and need to get a job on the Apple Genius Bar immediately. It's that they are fixated with knowing everything about a topic that one should know about it. They often struggle a lot with their self-confidence, related to but not limited to their intelligence. This can affect them in other areas too. A minor knowledge gap feels like a humongous failure. For example, if they're in the pub with their friend and their friend says to them, what's the currency of Nigeria? It's Naira, by the way, in case you're wondering. But when their friend asks them this question, they will sit there and think, oh my goodness, I don't know. I don't know. And they're panicking and they're thinking that they've failed because they don't know this, gap in their knowledge feels huge to them. Despite the fact they're forgetting that their friend also doesn't know, because their friend was the one that asked them. And it's not a failure at all not to know it. It's completely normal. How could we possibly know all of the currencies of the world? Then we have the expert. The expert puts a lot of pressure on themselves. They judge their knowledge by ease and speed. And by this, we mean that they have to remember things quickly and learn things quickly and be the best at things quickly in order to feel like they've achieved anything. Set extremely high standards for everything they do, even things that they don't even need to be good at. They often find it really hard to enjoy hobbies unless they're amazing at this hobby immediately. This means that they're often very easily discouraged and put off doing tasks that feel like they're outside of their capabilities or their skill sets. And lastly, we have the superhuman. The superhuman pushes themselves to the absolute limit. The superhuman has been known to not be able to say the word no to people who definitely need to hear the word no. They'll take on extra work, or they'll take on huge projects that they can't do, or shifts at work that they can't do, all because they just don't want to say no and seem like they're failing. This leads them to be huge overachievers, with other people marvelling at their wonder of how they could possibly do all of that. The superhuman faces burnout often. In this context, being burned out means feeling empty and mentally exhausted, devoid of all motivation, and sometimes it feels like you don't care anymore about things. It can feel like your stress is excessive and like you're drowning in your responsibilities. Naturally, the superhuman doesn't have the best work-life balance and doesn't intend to prioritise this either. So after learning all of that, it probably feels like this is completely inevitable, right? That this is life, there is no way to beat these feelings. So I guess we just have to suck it up and deal with it because everybody's just going to feel like this forever. Well, not quite. As with most things, there are coping mechanisms that we can use to deal with this, to deal with those feelings of imposter syndrome. Here are a few of my favourite coping mechanisms that I use daily. I want to tell you about a story of my friend Anna. Anna used to deal with imposter syndrome a lot at work. She really struggled with it. She wasn't in the best working environment, and this definitely worsened it. But one of the things that she did was every time she got positive feedback in an email, she would create a separate folder for that feedback and review it when she was feeling overwhelmed by the task that she had at hand. So she was fighting those feelings with evidence. She had a whole portfolio of all the times that her colleagues had said she was, in fact, good at her job. And if you were an imposter and actually rubbish at your job, you wouldn't get this feedback. So you're fighting that with evidence. Also, you have to focus on the facts. If you are getting good enough grades to get into the college or university you want, if you're getting the job that you would like, or if your friends are good to you, those are facts. People wouldn't be around you, people wouldn't work with you or see the good in you if you were not those things. So focusing on this can help reduce those feelings of anxiety and that feeling of imposter syndrome. Next, we can look to acknowledge our feelings and then reframing those negative thoughts. So here's an example. You walk into your lecture or your place of work and you immediately feel overwhelmed and like you're not supposed to be there. And like somebody any moment is going to turn around and be like, hey, you're not supposed to be here. Like in Mean Girls when he's like, she doesn't even go here. Like that. Well, acknowledging that likelihood is you're not the only person in the room feeling like that, and then letting that feeling sink in, it can do the world of good for you. And then take those feelings in and reframe them. Ask yourself, why do I feel this way? What can I get out of this? How can I benefit myself with this thought? Something I do when I feel overwhelmed is I say to myself, okay, well, feeling overwhelmed is a good thing. It means I've got loads of good things going on at the moment and it's within my control how well or how badly I do at them. But equally, I should ask for help if I'm struggling too much. This is like a minor version of CBT, which stands for Cognitive Behavioural Therapy. It's a talking therapy that can help you manage your problems by changing the way that you think and behave. It's most commonly used to treat anxiety and depression, but it can be really useful for other mental and physical health problems, including, but not limited to, imposter syndrome. It's all about changing perceptions. So we look at our emotions. What we feel affects how we think and act. And then what we think affects how we feel and act. And what we do affects how we think and feel. So it all just goes around in like a circle. And CBT is about breaking that circle and changing the way you think. And this can be really, really helpful with imposter syndrome. And it's all about reframing those negative thoughts. A key statistic to know is that 70% of the UK has reported feeling imposter syndrome at one point or another. This means that the chances are, by sharing your thoughts with someone, you've got nothing to lose because they themselves have most likely felt imposter syndrome or know somebody who has. I remember in one of my first jobs, I was 19 and working as a makeup artist for a big brand. Well, on one of the counters. Not that bougie, don't worry. And I was feeling like I knew nothing about my job. I was feeling so overwhelmed and like everyone was going to see that I was just rubbish at makeup and I was just talking rubbish about the products. And one day I decided to share this with my colleague and I said to her, I feel like I don't know what I'm talking about all the time. I feel like I'm just making it up. Even though I wasn't, I'd done training sessions, I did have the knowledge, it just didn't feel right coming out of my mouth. And I was expecting her to say, oh my goodness, I'm telling our manager and you're getting fired. That's really embarrassing for you. You should have sorted that out. Even though logically I knew she would never say that. She was a lovely girl. But actually what she said somehow still had such a surprising effect on me. She just said, oh my God, I know. I don't even feel like I belong here half the time. And this had a huge effect on me. I suddenly felt completely validated for the way I felt. Sharing my thoughts with someone made it so much easier to progress from that point. It also meant that my colleague and now friend was able to celebrate my wins with me, and I was able to celebrate them more clearly. Because when she'd witnessed me having a great conversation with a customer or doing a great job at their makeup, she knew that I was unsure about it and she would make sure to compliment me, adding to my mental portfolio of evidence that I'm not an imposter. If you feel like there's nobody in your life that you could turn to talk about this, there are loads of online forums and blogs that you can go to and research this for yourself and see that you're not alone. TikTok has been really helpful for me in this regard. So I'm aware that I just gave you a lot of information. I really ploughed it into your minds about what imposter syndrome is and how can we overcome it. And you might be there, head spinning like you're in a cartoon and feeling like, what can I take away from this session? So here I've limited down some key takeaways so that you can remember this session and put it into action if you are feeling these things. It's reported that the majority of people who feel imposter syndrome are people who are doing well in life. So remember, imposter syndrome is not a symptom of failure, it's a marker that you're actually doing really well. I hate to break it to you, but there's no real such thing as luck. You're either achieving or you're not. And if you're doing well enough that you feel imposter syndrome, chances are you're achieving something. At the very least, you're growing as a person. So remember to acknowledge your feelings and discuss them with friends, family, colleagues, or read online blogs if you don't have people you can talk to about this. It's okay to not have all the answers. Whether you're 16 or 24, your journey is just beginning. I'm 26 and it's only now in my life that I can honestly say I don't always feel like an imposter. And even then, the minute I have to do something that feels very grown up, I feel like an imposter. Like, for example, if I have to ask a plumber to come around and fix something, I immediately feel like I should just be asking an adult to do this. Feelings make us human, they make us kinder and they push us to achieve. So embrace them. Don't forget that by going through all of these things, it makes you a more empathetic person so that you can better advise your friends and family who are going through these things too. So don't see it as a downside of who you are. See it as just a small marker of everything that makes you up to be you. So thank you so much for listening today. I really hope you took something from it. And if you've never felt imposter syndrome, I hope you learned something about imposter syndrome and are better able to help your friends and family who might be dealing with this. I really enjoyed preparing this for you today. It added more sense to the things that I've gone through and made me feel like this is a topic that people should be talking about more often. And I now no longer feel like an imposter talking about imposter syndrome. I feel like a teeny tiny expert on the topic, although probably no way near what I should be. And that right there is an example of imposter syndrome sneaking in. But that's completely fine. I'll reframe my thoughts and I'll just be excited to learn from it. I hope you have a lovely day. I hope you enjoyed the session, and thanks again to Employability Bridgend for putting on the Digital Futures Festival.